Hello and welcome to the Stamperia Coffee and Chocolate mini album tutorial series designed for Scrap and Create. If you are just joining the series, all of these products that I'm using here are linked in the description box below to the Scrap and Create website, where you can just click on those products to follow along. In this video, we're going to begin working on page 3, so I'm going to set the base of my page aside. Bringing in my first piece of cardstock, it measures 6 inches by 6.5 inches. On the 6-inch side, we need to score this at 1/2 inch on the left-hand side. Then I'm going to use my corner rounder on the opposite two corners. And then I'm going to use my scissors to miter this 1/2 inch tab on each side. For my next piece, it measures 7.5 by 11 inches. Across the 11-inch side, we're going to score this at 1/2 inch. And 5 3/4 inch. I'm going to miter these corners on this 1/2 inch tab section and then use my corner rounder on the opposite two corners. For the last piece, it measures 3.5 by 7.5. On the 3.5 inch side, I'm going to score this at 1/2 inch on the right side. Then I'm going to use my scissors to miter those corners on that 1/2 inch tab section and the corner rounder on the opposite two corners. For this piece, I'm only going to ink the front. And for these two pieces, I'm going to ink the fronts and the backs. Then I'm going to come back and show you where to place these. The first piece I'm going to put on is this smaller flap. So I'm going to apply my adhesive to the 1/2 inch tab section. And then I'm going to use the grid on my mat to line this piece up where I want it to go. So I am going to place this piece 1 inch from the right edge. Once I get that into place, making sure that the top and the bottom are lined up, then I'm going to burnish this down. Now this will eventually be turned into a pocket, but I do need to have my decorative paper on first before I adhere the sides down to it. I'm going to take this piece next. I did a zigzag fold, so I folded the 1/2 inch tab back and then I folded this in on itself. And I'm going to use my centering ruler for this one. And I'm going to place this here in the center of the page. So that's looking like 2 5/8 inch. And I will go ahead and mark this here and here. Then I'm going to place my adhesive on my 1/2 inch tab, and it's going to go on top of that pocket that I just adhered down. So I'm going to place this right here, lining up my top edges first, making sure that the bottom is also lined up, and then adhering this down. Then I'm going to take this piece, again, using my centering ruler, but I'm going to use it here on the side. And I'm going to place this at 3 1/4 inches from center. Applying my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tab, and then I'm going to line up the score line on my flap with the edge of my page. Once I have it on and in the center. I'll go ahead and hold this down and then burnish. So now I have my flap here, I have my zigzag fold out, and then I have my flap that will eventually be a pocket. Next, we're going to move on to the back side of page 3. For the back of page 3, I'm going to start with 2 pieces that measure 4.5 by 7 inches. On both pieces, on the 7-inch side, I'm going to score at 1/2 inch. I'm going to score 1 at the bottom at 1/2 inch, and I'm going to score 1 at the top at 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to use my scissors to miter these 1/2 inch tabs. And then I'm going to use my corner rounder to round the corners on the opposite 2 corners. Then I'm going to cut one piece that measures 4.5 by 6.5. I'm going to fold on these score lines, and I'm going to ink all of these pieces and then come back and show you how they go on the page. For the back side, I'm going to start with the flap with the 1/2 inch tab at the bottom, placing my adhesive first on my tab, and then I'm going to adhere this to the bottom of the page on the right corner. So I need to line up the bottom edge and the right edge so that everything is straight on my page, and then I need to adhere this down. Once I have that one on, I'm going to open up this small flap on the page, and I'm going to take the other flap that has the 1/2 inch tab at the top, placing my adhesive on here, and I'm going to line this one up right next to the flap that we just placed down, and making sure that the top edge is lined up. Now it's okay if there is a slight gap between these 2 flaps, but you don't want them to overlap. Once you have that in place, you can go ahead and adhere this down. Now I'm going to close this. I'm going to close this flap, and I'm going to take this flap here and place it here in the center. So I'm going to bring in my centering ruler for this. And then I'm going to mark this at 3 1/4 and at 3 1/4. And then I'm going to overlap this by 1/4 inch. So at 1/4 inch, I'm just going to draw a line down my page. And now I'm going to apply my adhesive here on this very small section. And then I'll take my cardstock piece and line everything up. And make sure that this is adhered down. So I've got my flap with my photo mat attached, and I've got my 2 flaps that flip up and down. This is it for page 3, and next we'll move on to page 4. The first 2 pieces are 6.5 by 5.5, and I accidentally scored mine on the wrong side, so ignore those score lines. So we're going to score this on the 5.5 inch side at 1/2 inch, on the bottom of 1, and 1/2 inch on the top of the second piece. Then we're going to take our scissors and miter these ends. And then use the corner rounder on the other 2 corners. Then we're going to cut 2 pieces to 5.5 by 7.5. On the 5.5 inch side of the first piece, we're going to score 1/2 inch on the right hand side. On the second piece, we're going to score at 1/2 inch on the left hand side on the 5.5 inch side. Then I'm going to take my scissors and miter my tabs, and then I will use my corner rounder on the other 2 corners. Next, I'm going to take all 4 of my pieces and ink the edges on both sides, then I'll come back and show you how to put them on the page. I have taken my centering ruler on the bottom and top edge, and I've marked 3¼ inches from the center on both. And I'm going to place my 2 smaller flaps first. So I have the one with the tab at the bottom, so I'm just going to place my adhesive on here, and I'm going to line up the score line with the bottom edge of my page, right in the center. So I'm just using those marks as a guide for knowing where to place this. Once it's down straight, I can use my bone folder to burnish this down. Then I'll take my second of my smaller flaps, I'll place my adhesive here on my 1/2 inch tab section, and this one I'm going to adhere to the top. So I'm going to first place it between those marks I made, then I'm going to close that bottom flap so that I make sure and line up these edges as well. And once everything is lined up, I'll go ahead and adhere this down. Now for these ones, they are going to go inside of here. So I'm going to set this one here first and close this, and see it will not close all the way. So I need to just take this, my paper trimmer, and I'm going to cut just a little tiny bit off. See if that was enough. So now that one will close. I need to do the same thing for this second one. It's just a little too big as well. So I'm going to cut just a little tiny sliver off of this one. I'm going to recheck this. And now I'm going to use my corner rounder to recut those 2 corners that I cut from. And then take my inking tool, and I'll need to ink these edges again since I did cut that part off. And then I'm going to apply my adhesive here to my 1/2 inch tabs, and I'm going to make sure that when these are adhered down, they're even with the sides of my flap. So I'm using those same marks that I made at 3¼ inches from center. To fold this up and this up so it is enclosed in there. Then I will adhere this one down. And next, I'm going to do the same thing with this final one, applying my adhesive to the 1/2 inch tab section, and then using this side to line everything up. Making sure everything is straight, and then I'll adhere this down. So now I've got my two inner flaps, my lower flap, and my upper flap. The front of the page is finished, so we'll move on next to the back of page 4. For the back of page 4, the first piece is 7.5 by 7.5. On one of the sides, we're going to score at 1/2 inch down the left side. And the other piece measures 5.5 by 6.5. On the 5.5 inch side, we're going to score at 1/2 inch down the right hand side of the page. Then we'll take scissors and miter the ends on the 1/2 inch tab section on both pieces. And then we'll use the punch on the ends on the opposite sides. Next, I'm going to take my ink and I'm going to ink the edges on both sides of these pieces. I'm going to start with the larger of the two flaps. First, applying my adhesive to that 1/2 inch tab section. And then I'm going to be using the grid on my mat again to line this up. So I'm going to go 1.5 inches from this left edge and place my flap down here, making sure that it is straight across the top and the bottom edge. And then I'll adhere this down. For the second flap, I am marking in the center on the right hand side 3¼ inches up and 3¼ inches down. Next, I will apply my adhesive to the tab, and then I'm going to place the score line along the edge, using my marks to center my flap, and then I will adhere this down. Once I have my decorative paper on, I will adhere these sides down, so this will be a tuck spot, or I can place another stationary photo mat on it like I have done on previous pages. So this is it for page 4. We're finished with all of the pages, and that's the end of this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will begin working on decorating the cover first, and then we'll start going through each page one by one. If you are just joining the tutorial series, check out the description box below for all of the Stamperia Coffee and Chocolate papers that are linked to the Scrap and Create website, so you can pick up those papers and follow along. I'll see you in the next tutorial.